Hello and welcome to another episode of Ossi Comments on, in this case, World War I by Oversimplified. We have long waited, and this is actually the second time I am recording this. I did record this a few days earlier, but yeah, I forgot to turn on my microphone, so I have a nice video with nice commentary and it's gone. it's silent. But anyway, here we are again, and let's just do this. My name is Ossi. I'm a 31-year-old former history student, former video game journalist. I was born in East Germany and raised and now living in Hamburg, Germany. And yeah, I am a former student, but I have no degree. And I am not an expert, which means that I will now talk about a lot of things I think I know, and but I don't actually know. So in this cases, you have the info text box right there, which will contain all clarifications, all corrections, and of course further information. I think is nice to have in the cases. And yeah, after 3, 4, 5 videos with more or less the First World War, we have now arrived at the Second World War, which was the, I think, more devastating war, but also the much clearer war, because World War I is very, very complicated. All these political intrigues and alliances and what else was just wrapped in there, with no really clear start, no really clear end. And now we have the Second World War, which was fought between the 1st of September 1939 to the 2nd of September 1945, or it was the 2nd 39 and the 1st 55. I will put it in the info text box. And it has a clear antagonist, which is Nazi Germany, and it has clear protagonists, more or less, which are the Allies, namely the Russian Empire, not the Soviet Union, the USA, Great Britain, and to a certain degree France. And also we have antagonists, Italy and Japan. And yeah, so the Second World War in Germany is very differently taught than I think in most of the world, especially in Great Britain or the US, because we do not focus on the war itself. We do not focus on battles. We do not focus on specific dates when specific things happened. We do more focus on the actual Nazi regime, and to make sure that every student knows it's bad. And also we have lots and lots and lots of documentaries about the Second World War. So much so that every German around my age or younger that I ever spoke to is tired of it. It really tired of it, because in school we, at least in my school, we didn't have history class. We had a politics class, which was history, geography, and politics in one. And the history bits we talked about were of course more or less world history, but very, very, very just scratching the surface. And then like a whole year just about the Second World War and the Nazi regime and the things that led up to it and the aftermath. And then you have all these documentaries, and you can't switch any documentary channel in TV which is not animal documentary. And even those sometimes do get sneaky World War II documentaries in, but it's everywhere, and it's mostly how mad Hitler was and how bad the Nazi regime was, and how crazy the ideas were, and so on and so on. Sometimes about D-Day, sometimes about the German invasion in Russia, Operation Barbarossa, but nothing really informative about the war itself, about the tactics in the war, and so on and so on and so on. But yeah, I'm blabbering on too much again, and let's just start the video. It's about 14 minutes long, so let's hope this video stays below 1 hour. As the first World War video was very long, I will do this now in 2 parts. So this is part 1, and let's start.
This video was made possible by Skillshare. Churchill was a man with many talents. He was an artist, a butterfly enthusiast, and he had an unpublished manuscript about aliens. Clearly, he was a man with an insatiable thirst for knowledge. Maybe he could have loaded up his computer and logged onto Skillshare, an online learning community with more
went
than
to knowledge
19,000 classes
enthusiast.
in design, business, technology, and more. Perhaps he was considering a side career in fashion, but didn't know where to start. On Skillshare, he would find courses in fashion design and garment construction. Or if he wanted to learn app design, improve his photography, or just how to make a really good quesadilla, he would have found courses for all of these and more on Skillshare. Skillshare gives you access to high-quality classes taught by genuine experts working in their field. I work heavily with animation, and I was genuinely blown away by the number of really useful courses available to me, like this class full of tips and tricks for creating vector art, or this one for creating character walk cycles. For an annual subscription, Skillshare is under $10 a month. And if you'd like to try it out first, then I've got a deal just for Oversimplified viewers. The first 1,000 people to use this link, which can be found in the description, will get their first 2 months of Skillshare for just 99 cents. Be sure to try it out using the link in the description and learn something new today. Now, without further ado. It's 1902. A young man by the name of Benito Mussolini moves from Italy to Switzerland to avoid military service. He gets big into socialism, working for trade unions, writing for socialist newspapers, advocating a violent overthrow of European monarchies, the whole shebang. This gets him in a bit of trouble with the Swiss police, so he gets arrested, sent back to Italy, set free, returns to Switzerland, is arrested again, goes back to Italy again, completes his military service after previously avoiding it, and then after a brief stint as an elementary school teacher, he finally returns to work as an avid socialist. His speeches and journalistic abilities made him famous among Italian socialists. He was anti-war, so when Italy colonized Libya in 1910, he rioted and got arrested.
At this point, I have to make sure, or I have to stress that at least in my school, as the school system in Germany is decentralized, so every state has its own system, and I know of some states which have actual history classes, for example, but at least in my school, we did not really learn about Benito Mussolini. So we know he existed. We know he was the leader of Italy. We never learned how he got to power and how he lost it, because he lost it before the end of the war, I guess. He was thrown out. He was killed later even, if I remember correctly. And yeah, but yeah, you have to see this time. The whole start of the 20th century is you have the 19th century with lots of changes to the world, with lots of revolutions and riots and stuff like that, which shaped more or less especially Europe, but the whole world. And you have Italy was unified in the 19th century. Germany was unified in the 19th century, with in both countries rising nationalist powers. We have so much changes and wars and industrial revolution, and the whole climate is maybe you can say it's a lush farming ground for extremist ideas. That's why from 1848 onwards, the communists start to rise. They did not really rise yet. They will rise in the 1900s, 1910s. And you have also nationalists. You have not yet fascists, but they will come later with Benito Mussolini. So, and there's this famous quote. I don't know from whom it is, but I will put it in the info text box, which says that people follow leaders before they follow their vision, something like that. So even today, if you are very rhetorical, if you can speak, if you can speak in a sense that convinces the masses to believe every word you say, you have to speak confidently, you have to be rhetorical and stuff like that, and then you can gain the power to control these people more or less. And there is no doubt that Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler were people with this ability to just convince people with their charisma alone, more or less, and their rhetoric. Picture a world without Hitler, with anyone else from the Nazi party trying the same thing, and it might not happen the same way, because anyone else would be less charismatic, perhaps, than Hitler, and less encouraging to follow. The same with Mussolini, and yeah, that's how he rose to popularity. And
he was anti-war, so when
well.
Italy colonized Libya in 1910, he rioted and got arrested. Then World War I came along, and once again he protested Italy's involvement. But then he thought, wait a minute, this war could bring about the social climate needed to overthrow European monarchies and bring about the socialist revolution everywhere. And suddenly he was pro-war, but his fellow socialists didn't like his new pro-war stance, so they kicked him out of the party. So
yeah, we have to see at this point that, as I just said, communism was on the rise in the 1910s, and for example, in Germany, the SPD and the KPD, which were social democratic and the real communistic party, gained high election results in the 1912 election, for example, and again after the war. And if people, I said it in an earlier video, I think about what if the Central Powers won World War One, was when people are happy, or more or less happy, then they don't rise up. They don't lean to extremist ideologies. You know what I mean. And they do not overthrow their government, they do not overthrow the system they're in, because they view the system they're in as a good system. And but war, especially a devastating war like this, is a catalyst for unhappy people, because you have food shortages, you have violence, and so on and so on and so on. So the people get less happy, which makes them more ears for your extremist ideas, like communism, like it happened in Russia, like it almost happened in Germany as well, with the Spartacus uprising, and which was the idea of Trotskyism, because Trotsky was in firm belief that for the communistic idea to rise, that the people have to rise up, and they would only rise up if they are treated badly, which a war tends to do. And Mussolini saw this, and he was a socialist at this point. Socialists are communists or Marxists, and he saw this. Okay, there is a war. We are against the war, but hey, wait a minute. War is good for our idea because it makes the people suffer, and when the people suffer, they are responsive to us. But his part, which was the same idea Lenin had, as we have seen in Russian Revolution video from Oversimplified, and there it worked for Lenin and the Bolsheviks and the communists, and in Italy they had none of it and throw him out, and let's continue.
He was pro-war, but his fellow socialists didn't like his new pro-war stance, so they kicked him out of the party. So then he said, you know what? I'm done with socialism. We need something new, not based on class divisions tearing us apart, but based on unity through nationality. We'll conquer the Mediterranean and reunite all Italian peoples just like the days of the Roman Empire. I'll call it fascismo, and it will guide the Italian nation to greatness. That's all well and good, Mr. Mussolini, but what kind of haircut am I giving you? Let's go with bold.
So that always gets me. It's funny. Oversimplified is a very funny channel. I like them a lot. What I wanted to say here is that yes, what sometimes gets overlooked is that Mussolini had the idea that he wanted to recreate the Roman Empire. We all know that the Roman Empire once had the whole Mediterranean. It was a huge empire stretching to from Great Britain to Egypt and beyond. It was huge, and their sphere of influence was even greater. They had neighboring kingdoms and territories that were not annexed, but under direct or indirect control by Rome, as they could dictate more or less the whole trade, and had a huge army. And Mussolini used the nationalism that still was more or less there in the people, combined it with the idea of the Roman Empire, which still is something that the Italians are very fond of, and they see themselves as the descendants of the Roman Empire, even though the Holy Roman Empire later came, a whole complicated thing. And they wanted Italy to be, I don't want to sound like Trump or a Trump critic, even though I am not a fan of Trump, but they wanted to make Italy great again. And with great again, they meant they wanted to recreate the real original Roman Empire. And with they, I mean especially Mussolini. And let's see how that come to pass.
Italy had been on the winner's side in World War I, and they hoped they were going to get a lot out of it, but in the end, they only got a little, and they felt cheated. On top of that, a bad economy and weak governments meant that the Italian people were a little unhappy. So when Mussolini came along and said that he could fix everything, his fascist movement gained a lot of support. In 1922, he went to the king and said, "Make me prime minister, or I'll make me prime minister." And the king said, "You and what army?" "This army." Fair enough. Then he went about establishing a dictatorship with himself at its center. Europe had its first fascist dictator. Next up, Germany.
I always forget what Il Duce means, but it's like the Italian version of Führer or leader. I think it has some origins in the Roman Empire. I will look it up and I will put it in the info text box. And yeah, Italy has been on the winner's side, but they only joined the war at what was it, 1916? So 2 years in, and they were allied with Germany and Austria prior, but then they decided to stay neutral in the war, and then they decided to change sides and fought against Austria, but they did not make any real impact in the war. So they As on almost all frontiers, they were in a stalemate. They were in trench warfare, but in the mountains. And in the mountains, trench warfare is extremely difficult, and it has never been done again because it was so devastating and so stupid. Because when you have trenches and flatlands, okay, you have more or less two equally fortified positions, and no one has a real advantage except from those one with the machine guns and those one who are defending, which is why so many especially British and French soldiers died. And in mountains, you have mountains. You can watch a whole valley and the and mountains and stuff from one fortificated position in a mountain, which is almost impossible to be overrun, because you are on the high ground and you can see everything while you can't be seen that good. So of course the Austrians didn't make any ground either, but it was just staring at each other, doing nothing, with limited movement and limited success, which is one of many reasons why Italy did not get that much out of the war as they hoped for.
South at its center, Europe had its first fascist dictator. Next up, Germany. Germany had been on the loser's side, and they got absolutely wrecked by the Treaty of Versailles. They lost territory, had to demilitarize the Rhineland, had to reduce their army to just 100,000 men, couldn't have an air force, had to pay the Allies a huge amount of money that it didn't have, and a new rule was established that every Englishman withheld the right to walk into the center of Berlin, pick out any German they wanted, and spank the hell out of them. I made that last one up, but it helps you understand how all of this felt to Germans. On top of that, a bad economy and weak governments meant that when a small angry man with a silly mustache came along and said that he could fix everything, the German people loved it. Hitler had...
And so first, the Treaty of Versailles was devastating, to say the least. It was horrible. It was humiliating for the Germans, because the Allied powers, especially France and Britain, who fought the entirety of the war and lost so many men, they wanted to humiliate the Germans. They wanted to be extremely harsh to satisfy the mothers and sisters and brothers of those fallen soldiers, and especially, of course, the veterans. And so they were extremely harsh. This were just some bullet points, but Germany also was forced to accept that they were to blame for the war, even though it is now unanimously agreed on that they didn't, at least not alone, because everyone had their fair share in starting the war from both sides. And then they had to pay huge reparations, which not only led to an economic downturn, but when then the Black Friday happened in the US, this even accelerated the economic downturn so much that there was a hyperinflation, which meant that, for example, a loaf of bread was at one point like trillions of mark, and so the paper money was not even worth the paper it was printed on, and no one could buy anything. Everyone got poor out of a sudden, because even those who were rich in money, what can you buy when you have billions of mark, but then those billions of mark are literally worthless? So of course, if you had assets like immobiles and gold and stuff like that, that was worth something and could help you after the hyperinflation. But most people, especially those who did not have gold and art and stuff like that, were just suddenly poor. And yeah, and then I forgot what I wanted to what else I wanted to say. So oh yeah, so in 1922, I think it was, Hitler actually tried to coup d'etat against the new Weimar Republic, and he was accompanied by a famous war hero, Erich von Ludendorff, which fought in World War I and was more or less the high command, especially responsible for the Battle of Tannenberg against the Russians and the defeat of the Russians. And but he failed. He was arrested. He wrote his book Mein Kampf, or his books. I think it's 2 parts, and then he was released, and then he joined the Nazi Party. No, he joined the Nazi Party earlier because he wanted to infiltrate them, something like that. I think they will talk about that. But yeah, the Weimar Republic was a very, very weak government because it was more or less the first time that Germany had a republic, and it was all born of a small revolution within and after World War I. And there was too much power for the president, too little powers for everyone else. You had various parties who were more or less equal in shape and couldn't agree on anything. So yeah, all in all, it was so weak that nothing really was done, especially in all of those crises that happened.
Understand how all of this felt to Germans. On top of that, a bad economy and weak governments meant that when a small angry man with a silly mustache came along and said that he could fix everything, the German people loved it. Hitler had been a soldier during World War I, and he was crazy patriotic, and nobody was madder than him about Germany's humiliation.
And he was Austrian. Never forget, he was Austrian. We Germans, we don't get tired of stressing that he was Austrian. It doesn't matter in the end, and at that point he lived in Munich, I think, but he is originally from Austrian.
And he was crazy patriotic,
Austria.
And nobody was madder than him about Germany's humiliation. He helped start a new political party, and in 1923 attempted a march on Munich with his boys. And then he got arrested. But his popularity grew and grew, and in 1933, the president made him chancellor. He believed he was Germany's great destined savior, and he went full megalomaniac, establishing a dictatorship with himself at its center. Europe had fascist dictator number 2.
Yeah, so Paul von Hindenburg, who was another war hero from World War I, was president at that time, and he and I don't know who was the other guy at that point, they saw that something was not okay with Hitler, but they thought of themselves they still have the power, because as I just said, the president had the most power at that point, which is why the German president now has almost no power. And yeah, he then really fast, within 1933, established, so he got political enemies arrested, he got his own man killed, which I don't know if it was 1933 or a little later, but you might have heard of the Night of the Long Knives, or in German, die Nacht der langen Messer. Which, so in the NSDAP, the Nazi Party, Hitler had former soldiers who were armed as some kind of bodyguards, which was the SA, and they, or at least their leaders, were scheming maybe. And so within the and they were more or less threatening the power of Hitler, even though it's his own party. And my cats just go crazy right now. And so he had lots of them killed, especially officers and stuff like that, to so that only those who are loyal to him remain, and those were then used to kill others, like political enemies, and social enemies. I think was it also so people who were not in the politics and but could be dangerous for Hitler, like journalists, for example. And that's how he rose to power, and then accompanied by the fact that Hindenburg really soon died. So there was the position of president, who, as I just said, had the most power, was vacant, and this was an opportunity for Hitler to just take that as well. And then he made himself president and chancellor. So there was really no one who could oppose his power anymore, because usually the president and the chancellor were two powerful offices and had some kind of control over each other. And when you have both in one person, then you have a dictatorship, and that's what happened.
Establishing a dictatorship with himself at its center, Europe had fascist dictator number 2. Hitler and Mussolini had a lot of the same ideas.
Radical nationalism, totalitarianism, that's a hard word, violence and militarism, anti-democratic, anti-socialist, extremely racist. And I have here radical nationalism, total violence and militarism. I think not so much, at least not compared to Hitler, not that violent. Anti-democratic, anti-socialist. Yeah, even though he was a socialist former and quite racist. Yeah, I think Mussolini was never really racist. And what the heck? Hi there. I am recording right now, so please go away and hold the line. Okay, so stay there. So I don't know how racist Mussolini was. Like I said, we do not learn much about him, if at all. So
Europe had fascist dictator number 2. Hitler and Mussolini had a lot of the same ideas, but more importantly, they had the same enemies, and they started to get along. Anyone else want to be friends? Franco? No? You good? I do. Who's that? It's Japan, and they've taken over northern China. Let's rewind a bit. Japan had isolated itself from the rest of the world for over 200 years until the Americans showed up and said, you're going to trade with us and you're going to like it. Then the Western powers imposed a bunch of unequal treaties, meaning Japan's economy was bust. They also had no natural resources, so they decided to go get some. They went to war with China to gain a sphere of influence over Korea, and they took a bunch of China's stuff. But then the West said, hey, cut that out. And since Japan couldn't take on the West, they said, okay, I guess we'll just go home. Wait a minute, what are you doing? Taking advantage of a weakened China and setting up spheres of influence. But I was the one who weakened them. We know. And you guys didn't let me have anything. We know. That seems unfair. We don't think so. Okay, see ya. So Japan thought, screw this, and went to war with Russia, and stunned everyone by actually winning. Then they fully annexed Korea, but they didn't stop there.
Yeah, we talked about that in the video about the Russian Revolution. It was the Russo-Japanese War, which Japan could win because they were rapidly industrializing with help of the US, Germany, Great Britain, and France. So their troops were trained and equipped by those nations. And the Russians were not, because it was 1904 or something. Russia just slightly started to industrialize. They thought of themselves as the greatest army because they had the greatest army in terms of numbers, but they were ill-equipped, ill-trained, and overall just not good. Especially in Manchuria, because it's you have the most of the population of Russia lives in the area that is west of the Ural Mountains, so in the European part of Russia. And this here is like 11 time zones further east, with a very, very, very not dense population. I don't know what the opposite of of dense is, but there is almost no one living there, and you have to get troops there. And those troops that already were there were, as I said, ill-equipped and ill-trained, and those that would come were also so, and would take their time. So yeah, it was more or less an easy win for Japan, especially because the Russians did underestimate Japan. And that led to that gave birth more or less to the Japanese real empire, when what we will now talk about. They then seized the territory that the Germans held, and then went even further, which is why some people argue that either there was no Second World War because the war never ended. It started with the Russo-Japanese War and was continuing without any breaks, more or less, from 1904 to 1945. And others argue that the Second World War started in 1932 or 1933, when Japan invaded China. Because that's a war and an invasion that still was going on when the First World War actually started. So and became part of the war, and with becoming part of the war, it is a predecessor of the war, or it is actually part of the war earlier, stuff like that. And so yeah,
war with Russia and stunned everyone by actually winning. Then they fully annexed Korea, but they didn't stop there. In World War I, they took Germany's colonies and islands in Asia. And then in an incident that was maybe staged by the Japanese army, a bomb blew up a Japanese train in Manchuria, giving them an excuse to launch an invasion and take over. So here's the situation. Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Japan all believe they're racially superior, all feel hostility towards the Allies, and all want to militarize and take over more stuff.
We have to make clear that for the Germans, the Japanese and the Italians were not racially superior. The Germans thought of themselves as the highest of the highest, and they actually had their class system. So the Aryan race was at the top, and I think the Italians were even below some group in between, so they were not inferior in not that inferior like Jews or disabled people were, but they were pretty much down there, and Japanese also. I think even the British were more valuated than the Italians and Japanese, because if I remember correctly, Hitler himself spoke pretty highly of the British, even to a point that you can say he admired them to some degree. Yeah.
Superior, all feel hostility towards the Allies, and all want to militarize and take over more stuff. And so they did. Let's start with Germany. Hitler hated the Treaty of Versailles, and now he was ready to begin undoing it. In complete violation of the treaty, the first Luftwaffe squadrons were set up, conscription was introduced, and he pimped up his army. The Allies did nothing. Then Hitler sent his army back into the demilitarized Rhineland, giving orders to immediately retreat if the Allies showed up. The Allies did nothing.
So, of course, Germany is to blame for the start of the Second World War. but we should never forget that the Allies are to some degree also responsible, because you have this Treaty of Versailles, you have these clear regulations that Germany has to follow, like no soldiers in the Rhineland. And another was do never, under no circumstances, unify with Austria. And they did both. And the Allies let them happen. Because the Allies did not want a war. So, of course, they had good reasons for it. But it's like Hitler was tipping his toe into the water and see how the Allies react, and where was undoing more and more and more of the treaty, always with bearing in mind that he is violating the treaty and prepared for undoing the undoing, because if at any point the French or the British or the Americans or anyone would have stepped in and say no, then he would have stopped, as we just heard. When he was sending his men to the Rhineland, they had the order to immediately retreat if anyone was against it. But no one was doing anything. So they gave Hitler the time and the peace to not only undo this treaty, but also pimp up his army, train the army, recruit the army, build war machines, built the Autobahn. We all know he didn't build it, he didn't invent it, but he expanded it with, some believe, with war in mind, just to have quicker troop movements. And all the while the Allies were doing nothing.
Into the demilitarized Rhineland, giving orders to immediately retreat if the Allies showed up. The Allies did nothing. With his military re-strengthened, he could now move on to step 2. He wanted to rapidly increase the Aryan population, and to do so, he needed Lebensraum, or in other words, he would have to take over the world. But for now, a good portion of Europe would do, and he began eyeing up his neighbors. The Allies finally started to get worried, so they implemented a fairly useless diplomatic strategy called appeasement, and it went a little something like this. Hitler would say, "I want that thing," and the Allies would say, "You can't have that thing." "Okay, you can have that thing, but no more." "I want that thing." And repeat.
This is why Neville Chamberlain is viewed as very, very weak today, and even in that time, because he just let Hitler do, with no restrictions in case of annexing Austria, which was done by a maybe staged public voting. So the Austrians actually voted to join Germany in 1938, I think it was, or 1936. And so it was in terms of what is Völkerrecht? Let me just look that up. International law. Really? Okay. In terms of international law, it was more or less justified. So they let them do that. And then you have these Sudetenland, which is an area around the borders of Bavaria and Saxony, within the Czech Republic, which is inhabited by a minority of Germans, which are in those places, I think, the majority. So there were more Germans living than there were Czechs living, which was, I think, 3 million Germans or something like that lived in the Sudetenland. And so you also had a course in international law, or international law justified reason to annex the Sudetenland, which was again, I think this time not by a vote, but there were people in the Sudetenland who wanted to join Germany and supported the idea and convinced the governments to not do something against it or something like that. And then he annexed that as well. And then he annexed the rest of Chamberlain stepped in, but I'm too quick here.
Okay, you can have that thing, but no more. I want that thing. And repeat. In 1938, Hitler's army marched into Austria and just took it, with no resistance. Boom, this is Germany now. Next, he demanded to be given the Sudetenland, an area of Czechoslovakia with many ethnic Germans. The Allies held a meeting with Hitler in Munich and said, "Look, we're going to give you what— Hang on, this meeting is about my territory. Shouldn't I come to the meeting too? Anyway, we're going to give you what you want." Really? Yeah. Just like that? Yep. What's the catch? Just sign this piece of paper promising you won't invade the rest of Czechoslovakia. Okay. Then Chamberlain returned home victorious, waving his signed piece of paper in the air, declaring crisis to be averted and the continuation of world peace, and we built a statue of Chamberlain in his honor, and every day on the 30th of September we celebrate Chamberlain Day. Hitler's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia. What? He's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia. Oh.
This is actually Chamberlain got out of this plane, and on the airfield, I think, was set up a press conference in which he heroically proclaimed that war has been averted, something like that. I think that even was the slogan, and that he had this contract with Hitler, which said we can have the Sudetenland, but nothing else. And pretty much soon after, Hitler did invade the Sudetenland. I think it was not on the same day. It was not like while this celebration was going on, but it was very shortly after, I think. And I think even in that case, the Czechs did not really do something. So it was not like war or something, and it was just annexed. I don't know the details of this, but I will put it in the info text box, obviously. And yeah, this is more or less one of the final straws or nails in the coffin for Chamberlain, who will still be prime minister for some time now, but this will come back to haunt him when Churchill then comes along.
Czechoslovakia. What? He's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia. Oh. You lied to me. What do you expect? I'm Hitler. Not to be outdone, Mussolini also wanted to get in on the action. He thought to himself, isn't there a not yet colonized nation somewhere which is so underdeveloped that the people would be defending themselves against our tanks with literal bows and arrows and wooden spears? Oh, there is? Fantastic. And so he took it. Italy also wanted to control the entrance to the...
Yeah, modern day Ethiopia was never colonized because the those who tried were more or less so there was a very, I think there were many tribes, but there was a very strong tribe, and the king of Ethiopia who on one hand on diplomatic had diplomatic ties and diplomatic relationships so well done that they did not want to invade. On the other hand, they had a pretty strong force to repel those who tried. But that was in times before tanks, that was in times before automatic gunfire. So when then the Italians came along, this strong army, I think they put up a good fight. And the Adriatic Sea. So you have to remember, this more or less a huge portion of this area here, this coastal area, was in the Middle Ages and after controlled by Venice, and they also controlled the entrance to the Adriatic Sea. This is, as I often explain, because this is a very important trading route, and if you control both sides of the entrance to this trading route, you can enforce taxes and you can defend them as well. So if any fleet wants to go in and maybe capture Venice, for example, they have to go through the Adriatic Sea, and then you can shoot from two sides because it is a narrow strait, and you have guns which will reach each other's coast, but for that you have to control it first. If you share this entrance, then you might be able to shoot from here, but they'll be able to shoot back and destroy your shootings. So this is why it is always important to have both sides of a narrow strait, especially if it's an important one.
Fantastic. And so he took it. Italy also wanted to control the entrance to the Adriatic Sea, so they occupied Albania. Then, in another incident which was maybe staged by the Japanese, gunfire was exchanged by Japanese and Chinese troops at the Marco Polo Bridge, and the Japanese launched yet another invasion against China. They swept through Beijing and Shanghai, and then advanced through the Yangtze Valley to China's then capital, Nanking. It was here that saw the worst of Japan's shocking atrocities committed against the Chinese people.
So I'm really glad that they include all the events that lead up to the actual Second World War, and that includes that there, as I said earlier, was actually already a war going on in China, initiated by the second invasion and of course the first invasion of Japan and China. And Nanking, for example, is again something that I did never learn in school about. I heard of it only in the news when Japan once again declined to apologize for it. So I am, as far as I know, still today, until today, they never apologized and they never even acknowledged that it was happening, the atrocities at Nanking. So I don't even know what exactly happened, but as far as I remember, they did kill a lot of the inhabitants because Nanking was the capital of China, and China did not give up. As I said in an earlier video, if you capture the capital, some would believe that then the country gives up because this happens 2 times with France, but no, usually it isn't that easy. And you have other big cities, you have maybe even already evacuated the government and any important stuff, and maybe that's why the Japanese soldiers or leaders were a bit angry, and they channeled their angriness and killed civilians and raped civilians. We don't have to forget that a lot of women were raped, as far as I remember. And as I said, Japan is denying it until this day. So there's that.
Saw the worst of Japan's shocking atrocities committed against the Chinese people. Back in Europe, Germany and Italy made their relationship status official by signing the Pact of Steel. Then, Hitler turned his eyes towards Poland and the hated Polish corridor, splitting Germany in two. At this point, the Allies really had to put their foot down, and they warned him that an invasion of Poland would mean war. Hitler had planned to continue his advance eastward, but he didn't want to end up fighting a war on 2 fronts. So for now, he made an alliance with Stalin, saying, "How about we both invade Poland and split it between the 2 of us, and I definitely won't not refrain from not betraying you sometime in the future." Sounds good.
It wasn't an alliance. We have to make this clear. Hitler and Stalin made a non-aggression pact. That means that they would both invade Poland, Russia from the east and Germany from the west, and split it between the two, like they did after the 7 Years' War. But then it was also split with Austria, but in this case Austria is part of Germany. So and Poland was a really new country at that point because it was just formed. It was after the First World War that it was formally still split between Austria, Germany and Russia. And then Germany would capture a lot of Russian territory, which then, after the war was lost, were not given back to Russia, but they were then made their own states, like Lithuania and Estonia and Belarus, and all these new countries. And Poland was one of them, which were given these small corridor that they had sea access to, so they could do maritime trade, for example, and have a navy and stuff. And so Hitler and Stalin made more or less a pact to conquer Poland and split it between the two. And it was not an alliance. Stalin would not support Hitler in his efforts, and Hitler would not support Stalin. And there were even fightings between Soviet soldiers and German soldiers, because at some point they would meet, because both are closing in. They would meet in the middle. And then there were some minor fights between Soviets and Germans, which then were halted, and the territory was more or less established then. And but yeah, it was not an alliance, even though even the Allies did think of it as some kind of alliance, or something that could lead to an alliance, which led then to Operation Pike, which was a military plan to bomb, because the Allies feared that at some point Russia would begin to sell oil to Germany. And we all know oil is something Germany desperately needs, because they don't have their own, or they have their own, but not really much. And they needed more. And because of this non-aggression pact, the Allies thought this could lead to the Soviets just selling oil, because they also need money. And to prevent that, France and Britain made a plan for Operation Pike to attack the oil fields in southern Russia, which, if that would have happened, could have meant that Russia would indeed ally with Germany and fight against the Brits and the French. But it didn't happen, because the plans were discovered when Germany was overrunning France, and they made it public. But yeah, Operation Pike, look it up.
Future. Sounds good. This new alliance stunned the West. On the 1st of September 1939, German troops entered Poland, and Britain and France declared war on Germany. The Poles fought hard, but they were no match for the two giants crashing down on them from either side. Then came a period known as the Phony War, where everyone just sort of sat around not doing much. The French had launched a small invasion into the Saarland, but they maintained mostly defensive positions, and after a while decided to just turn around and call it a day. Speaking of France, the French were still super proud of their...
Yeah, the Phony War was a last desperate attempt to prevent actual fighting, because the First World War is still in the minds of the people, because many of the people were actually fighting in it. It was only 20 years ago, so it was fresh in the memory. There were still plenty of people left who lived at that point, and were fighting in the war, and they wanted to prevent it. And also they more or less wanted to of course recruit armies and prepare defenses, like manning the Maginot Line, manning the rest of the border to Belgium, and stuff like that. So and still they were trying to do it to solve the issue diplomatically, which again is one of the reasons why Chamberlain is viewed as weak, as well as the French government at that point. And as we all know, that also gave time to the Germans to prepare themselves and invade France.
After a while, decided to just turn around and call it a day. Speaking of France, the French were still super proud of their victory in World War I, and they hadn't really moved on from it. They still used horses, they dispatched messages by motorbike instead of using radio, orders from the commander-in-chief were usually pretty vague, and the troops were rarely inspected. They built a line of defenses along their German border, but didn't bother extending it all the way to the Channel. And
No. That's a misconception.
They built a line of defenses along their German border, but didn't...
So, the Maginot Line, the actual Maginot Line goes from Italy, so from the Mediterranean, across the border to Switzerland, across the border to Germany, and across the border to all the way to the Channel. Because, again, First World War, Germany came through Belgium, so this would be defended as well. And as Italy was viewed as an important force, the line also went to Italy to prevent an invasion from Italy, and also to prevent maybe Germany or Italy would go to through Switzerland. So the only fact is that the Maginot Line was at the German border, because Germany was the biggest threat. They did reinforce this part of the Maginot Line heavily. And by heavily, I mean like bunkers and turret towers and stuff like that. And not only directly at the border, but also sometimes behind, so the defensive positions could be defended from behind them. But they also had fortified positions all the way to the Channel, and also they had plans. They did not heavily reinforce the border to Belgium because Belgium was an ally, or at least neutral. So it was not that heavily reinforced. What they didn't, but it was reinforced and it was manned, and some of the best soldiers of France were stationed here. The bigger problem is the Ardennes, because there the defenses were even less, because it was naturally impregnable. You couldn't go through, or at least they thought, especially not with tanks and stuff. And so what Germany did is they invade Belgium. Surprise, surprise. But that's more or less just a decoy. So their army goes through Belgium, and then the response of the France is, of course, and the Brits is, of course, also race into Belgium and hold them here at the river. I don't know what river it is. And then, but even though this is the bigger part of the army, it's just a decoy, because the real force goes then through the Ardennes and encircles them, which is something they did not expect. And when you are encircled, then you get shot from every side, and that's bad. And that's because, and as I said, this is the finest French troops were stationed here. This is why France lost their finest troops, because more or less only the British would be evacuated at Dunkirk, and the French troops were wiped out.
Vague, and the troops were rarely inspected. They built a line of defenses along their German border, but didn't bother extending it all the way to the Channel, and they wouldn't launch artillery strikes against Germany out of fear of being retaliated against. In a war, they didn't want to attack the enemy, and at first the UK wasn't much better.
Because for the French and the British, it was not an aggressive war, it was a defensive war. They were expecting that Germany would attack, and they didn't want to provoke it. As I said, they still wanted to solve this diplomatically, and it's not like, if they would shoot, then they could be viewed as the aggressors, and it would justify an even sooner invasion of the Germans. So maybe they were just hoping we declare war, but as long as Germany does not invade us, it's not our problem. We defend ourselves if they come, but we won't provoke, and we don't want to attack them, because also they know Germany is a powerhouse. And once again, after being the most powerful army in the First World War, they were once again the most powerful army. And the Allies more or less knew that. So why would they awake a sleeping giant?
In a war, They didn't want to attack the enemy. And at first the UK wasn't much better. Chamberlain still naively hoped that the war could be ended diplomatically. Instead of bombing raids, the RAF dropped propaganda leaflets over German cities, which one air marshal said likely did nothing but provide the continent with toilet paper for the duration of the war. They also only sent 200,000 men to France, while the French had mobilized millions. Both Britain and France wanted to avoid a repeat of the First World War, and so they wanted to keep the war as far from home as possible. So they turned their eyes north, towards Norway. Neutral Sweden was exporting iron ore to Germany through neutral Norway, so the Allies asked them if they could please stop exporting iron ore to Germany, but this request was refused. Then, the Soviet Union attacked Finland, so the Allies said, how about we land troops in Norway and move them across Sweden to go help out your good pal Finland, and along the way maybe take control of all your airfields. But
I have to do research on why did Sweden export the iron through Norway. As we can see, this is a whole it's a very long way, and it involves another country which has to be fine with it. Whereas Sweden, why wouldn't they just go down here and, I mean, just deliver it here? I mean, like Lübeck and Rostock and Danzig, that's all great naval cities. And we all know that Sweden had their naval cities as well, like Malmö and whatever this was, and Stockholm. They could also, if it has to go by ship, they could also go here. So why did they export it through Norway? Or did they? Because Sweden was neutral. They actually were also neutral in the First World War, but they were leaning towards the Germans, whereas the Norwegians were also neutral, but were forced by Britain to lean more towards Britain, and that's why there was no support from Norway to Germany, and there was no support from Sweden to Germany, even though they did want to, because they had their own food shortages and could barely feed their people. But they were leaning against Germany, so I could imagine that they were leaning towards Germany again, but they did not want to be viewed as such in fear of getting attacked, maybe, like Norway. Which is why they exported through Norway, so that it looks like Norway is the one exporting the iron to Germany. As I said, I will research that. That's an interesting topic.
Land troops in Norway and move them across Sweden to go help out your good pal Finland, and along the way maybe take control of all your airfields. But Norway and Sweden still said no. So the UK mined the waters around Norway to force any transport ships into international waters, and they also attacked a German tanker they found in the area. Hitler realized what the Allies were up to, and he quickly moved to secure his supply of iron ore. He launched an invasion through Denmark into Norway. The Allies rushed to land troops.
If I remember correctly, the invasion of Denmark took like not even days. I don't think if it was done in one day, so in hours, or if it took like a week, but it was a very, very, very short invasion, and I think Denmark immediately gave up or something like that. And the invasion in Norway also was done very, very quickly.
To secure his supply of iron ore, he launched an invasion through Denmark into Norway. The Allies rushed to land troops at key ports along the coast, but Germany had taken control of Norway's airfield, and their air superiority decided the fight. The Allies had to retreat. After this slightly embarrassing failure, Chamberlain resigned and was replaced with Winston Churchill, who had a slightly different approach to dealing with the Germans. Hitler's overall strategy was similar to Germany's First World War strategy. Attack France, defeat France, knocking out the UK in the process, then turn on the Soviet Union and win the war. During the Phoney War, the Allies had given Hitler time to prepare his forces. Now, he was ready to attack. The Allies had wanted to place troops in Belgium, but Belgium had refused, and in a move that surprised pretty much no one, Hitler launched an invasion to get around France's defenses. The Allies charged into Belgium at full speed to meet the German invasion head-on, and it looked like a repeat of the First World War was coming. But this time, Hitler had a trick up his sleeve. Blitzkrieg. As the Germans advanced, they sent thousands of refugees westward, slowing down the Allies. Then
this is not Blitzkrieg. First things first. Belgium, as I said earlier, did not want to have French troops in its borders or in its country because they were neutral, and they wouldn't support France and they wouldn't support Germany, at least in their opinion. And also having troops there would mean that maybe the economy would be bad or something like that. I don't know really. And then Blitzkrieg is Blitz is the German word for flash, and Blitzkrieg means flash warfare, which on its base only means rapid movement, which I said in the World War One video. Maneuver warfare is the strong suit of the German army. Not attrition warfare, maneuver warfare. And they maneuvered the heck out of the Allies in that early stage because of Blitzkrieg, which was fast movement. And okay, it was done like this. You have two main forces. You have the infantry, which is foot soldiers, and you have the artillery, which is, for example, tanks. And usually in warfare, it was that tanks would go alongside infantry. So it was really, really slow, even though the tanks could be faster, but they had to be protected. This is something that was still in the mindsets from the First World War, when tanks were first not as fast, and second, they were heavily dependent on infantry to guide them and to guard them and to repair them. And Germany surprised everyone because they just sent pure tank divisions as fast as they could over the lands. And when a tank hits on infantry, that's not good for the infantry. And the real infantry just came after. And so that's Blitzkrieg in a nutshell. I will put more or less the exact definition of Blitzkrieg in the info text box, of course. But yeah, that's that. And the part with the refugees I did not hear of until this video. So, but of course the refugees. So the Germans invaded, and the Belgian public did not want to be killed and fled. If they were deliberately sent by the Germans or just fled is an argument in itself. But yeah, of course there are refugees.
Blitzkrieg. As the Germans advanced, they sent thousands of refugees westward, slowing down the Allies. Then, to the south, the French had left the Ardennes, an area full of hills and forests, pretty underdefended because they thought it was naturally impenetrable. Well, the Germans were about to penetrate it with everything they had. They smashed 50 Wehrmacht divisions through and encircled the Allied armies at lightning speed. The best of the Allied forces were now trapped. The Germans squeezed in from all sides, taking out France's best armies and nearly wiping out the British too. But they managed to make a desperate last-minute escape at Dunkirk, with British civilian ships even making the perilous journey to bring their young men home. With most of the French forces depleted, the Germans breezed through, taking Paris, and France fell. What the Germans couldn't do in World War I, Hitler had done just like that.
Yeah, so the overall advantage Germany had in World War II is that they knew what these... So you have the First World War, and then you have the 20 years in between. And in these 20 years, all the inventions prior, especially from First World War, were worked on. So tanks would get lots better. Airplanes would get lots better. And Germany, even though Jewish scientists fled or were captured, like Einstein fled, others were captured, and even some German scientists like Otto Hahn refusing to help the Germans, they still had a lot of scientists. Germany was not for nothing once the country of the poets and thinkers, and they were working hard to improve the designs, to improve all these new machinery and weaponry, even to a point that they at one point invented a rifle that had a curved top thingy where the bullet comes out, and which was a stupid idea, but they experimented with a lot of stuff. And so but that's one part. And the more crucial part is they did not only improve on the designs and the inventions, they also trained with them and did know what they were capable of doing. Like I just said, a full panzer or tank division has not ever been seen before and was more or less thought of as impossible by the Brits and the Franks, who were still in the mindset of the First World War. But the Germans knew what they were capable of doing, and they did it. They breezed through. They did use tactics that were never seen before, and especially as fast as it was never been seen before. And like I said, the best soldiers of France were stationed at the Maginot Line at Belgium, and they were wiped out. And France had the Brits. Most of the Brits that survived would leave to Dunkirk, so France was pretty much defenseless. That's why Paris fell, and with Paris, France fell. Not because just Paris fell, because the government was already in Bordeaux at that time. And but they had no defenses, and to prevent the Germans to reach havoc, they just surrender, because it's the same thing to do. You have nothing to hinder the Germans. You would just throw lives away, and that doesn't look good on TV.
And France fell. What the Germans couldn't do in World War I, Hitler had done just like that. Hitler hoped that with the fall of France, the UK would also lose hope and sue for peace. But quite annoyingly, it didn't, and he needed to secure the Western Front, so he tried to force them into submission with mind games. The UK were now all alone, and Hitler wanted to emphasize that. First of all, just before France fell, Italy finally declared war on the Allies, making the UK's situation even worse. Next, instead of just occupying all of France, Hitler occupied the coastal areas for defense, but allowed France to continue its existence as a German puppet state. This way, it looked like the UK's old ally had decided to switch sides. Hitler also hoped that the UK wouldn't attack any of her old allies' navy bases or colonies in Africa, giving Hitler an extra line of defense to the south. But the UK made sure to respond to this by sailing down to France's navy base in Algeria and wrecking a bunch of ships. So have at it. Hitler then began laying down plans for an invasion of Great Britain. Before German troops could land on British soil, he would first need air and naval superiority across the Channel. Waves of German bombers came, while the completely outnumbered RAF worked bravely around the clock in an
So yeah, Hitler made plans to invade Great Britain, plans that would never come into fruition. And Churchill actually, so this is just a fun side note. Churchill actually anticipated it, and then had the idea of forming the British Home Guard, which is more or less an army of volunteers who were not fit to serve in the actual army. So you have people that are too old maybe, or have some minor injuries, or have a trade that does not allow them to leave the country, for example bakers and stuff like that. So everyone who is unfit for the real army but fit enough to serve in the Home Guard would then be put into the Home Guard, which then consisted of almost 2 million volunteers who would defend the British soil if Germany would invade. So but they had a problem. because all weaponry, all armory, all ammunition was more or less needed by the army itself to fight the Germans and to help others fight the Germans. So the Home Guard actually was equipped with sometimes medieval guns, World War I guns, and at one point Churchill, so it is a true story, but some of it is mythical. So as the story goes, Churchill said to his war minister, I think, that every man and woman in the Home Guard should be armed. And then he was told that this is not really possible because there are not enough guns and rifles and stuff for everyone, because, as I said, the army need that. And then Churchill said, give them some weapon, and even if it's a club or a pike. And it seems that this war minister then took that literally and ordered 250,000 pikes to be made, which was viewed by the Home Guard as a real insult, because of course that's pikes, and Churchill was reportedly angry because he was just speaking figuratively and did not give the order to actually produce 250,000 pikes. But yeah, that's the story. And actually the Home Guard never fought anyone and never killed a Nazi, because as we all know, Germany did not invade, and we will soon learn why. But there were lots of injuries regardless, because the people in the Home Guard, they were not really good trained, and they had medieval weapons for and old actual guns, and so sometimes they were shooting each other or themselves in accidents and hurting each other and themselves in accidents while trying to train and posing, for example. And that's the story of the Home Guard. 2 million people defending Great Britain if needed.
Across the channel, waves of German bombers came while the completely outnumbered RAF worked bravely around the clock in an attempt to quell the German attacks. At first, the Luftwaffe targeted British ports and coastal facilities. Then it attacked RAF bases, crippling the RAF's ability to defend the nation. And it looked like Hitler's Great British Invasion was coming. But then, Churchill ordered a small, pretty insignificant bombing raid over Berlin. It didn't do much damage, but Hitler was furious, and he immediately ordered the Luftwaffe to refocus its attacks on civilian targets in London. Children were sent off to the countryside away from their parents to avoid danger, and frequent trips to air raid shelters became a daily occurrence. But British morale held firm. Smiling, knitting, lounging casually, these people have balls of steel. This refocusing on London.
And do not forget, these keep calm and carry on, and we're standing in it together, and all these slogans were more or less just propaganda, because these people so the propaganda was, we're standing all together, meaning that rich and poor would stand together and be together in those tubes, for example, or these tunnels, which wasn't the case, because those who had money had their own bunkers, and the two-class society was still going on during the Second World War, but the propaganda was aiming at raising the morale of the people and making them believe that they're all the same and there are no classes. But yes, there were classes, and they could hide in the tubes, because in London the underground is like 200 meters deep or something like that. So here in Hamburg, for example, the underground railway is in most cases a few meters deep. So usually if I go to the train that is underground, then I have stairs that go at a maximum 20 meters down. Usually it's more like 5 meters, 4 to 10 meters maybe. And in London it's way deeper. It's not 200 meters, that's a lot, but it's I think, what was it, around 50 meters? I will put it in the info text box, but it is very deep, so it is naturally very protected against those air raids. And even if an entrance would be damaged or even collapsing, it's all still connected, so you could just go to the next station. And
smiling, knitting, lounging casually, these people have balls of steel. This refocusing on London also gave the RAF breathing space to reorganize, so Hitler kind of shot himself in the foot there. Just the foot for now. Finally, the Luftwaffe sent one massive all-out attack on London, and the RAF successfully repelled it, destroying many of the German aircraft and placing air superiority firmly in British hands. Hitler's invasion had to be postponed, but the bombing of British cities continued for some time.
And postponed in that case means it never happened. So yeah, this video was now a little bit longer than my first one that I made without having the microphone on. But yeah, I hope you liked it. Feel free to watch my other videos on my channel. Part 2 will come in a few days. It will not be the next or the video after the next, but I think then it is. Because I want to do something other in between, so a little bit stretching it out. And yeah, if you like the video, please like and subscribe. If you don't like the video, please dislike and maybe tell me why. And the link to the original video is, as always, in the description. And yeah, as I said, watch my other videos and be kind to me. The next video will be the first part of epic rap battles of history. We will take a look at 3 battles of epic rap battles of history, and commenting on them as far as I am able to. But as we all know, it's the info text box is fun. Just don't listen to me. Just use me to get to sleep or something. And if you want to learn, then you have the info text box. And until then, thank you for watching. My name was Ossi, and have a good night, have a good day, and bye bye.